Okay, now we're going to talk about scopes. A variable scope determines where that variable can be seen in your program. Scopes allow you to limit the accessibility of your variables, and these are the key to encapsulation, helping keep separate parts of your program, such as functions, away from each other. In our next program, the scoping program, will demonstrate scopes. The program creates 3 variables with the same name in 3 separate scopes. It displays the values of these variables, and you'll be able to see that even though they all have the same name, the variables are completely separate entities. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. I've got my new text document, and I'm going to save that. Current term, week 8. And we'll just call this scoping.cpp. Okay, so I start my initial comment. Scoping demonstrates scopes. I will include IOStream and give a directive that I'm using the std namespace. Okay, now I'm going to have a prototype declaration for a void function called func, and I'll open my main function. Okay, the first thing I do is I'll declare an integer called var and set that equal to 5. This is a local variable in main. Okay, now we'll just see out. In main, var is var, and 2 line breaks. Okay, now we'll call our function func, which will define that momentarily. And now we'll have a cout back in main. Var is var, 2 line breaks. Now I'm opening up a new scope inside of main. Anytime you have these curly braces around a block of code, that is a new scope. And sometimes these scopes are named, as in the case of an actual function. Sometimes they are part of a for loop, or an if statement, or an else statement, or a do-while loop. Other times you may there may be some reason for you to set up a new local scope without any real name to it. And if it's not part of a loop or a switch statement or an if-else statement, it will just run and then go back into the main function. So in this scope, we're going to say cout in main in a new scope var is var, 2 line breaks. Now we'll create a new var in our new scope. And we'll set an integer var equal to 10. And this is the variable in a new scope which will hide the other variable named var. Okay, cout in main in a new scope var is var, 2 line breaks. Okay, then we will close this new scope, this unnamed scope, and in main, or actually, This one is at the end of main. Var created in new scope no longer exists. At the end of main, var is var and return 0. Okay, that's the end of our main function. Now we need to define our void function called func, and we will set var as an integer variable, a brand new integer variable in this function, equal to -5, and this is a local variable in func. And we see out in func var is var 2 line breaks. Go ahead and save my code, and we'll go and compile it. Okay, now when I run it, okay, so step by step. In our main function, we defined an integer variable called var, set it equal to 5, and then we output that in main var is 5. Then we call our function func. So we skip down to our function where we set an integer variable named var equal to -5, and then we output what the value is. In func var is, and we see that it's -5. We're back into our main function after leaving our void function. Back in main var is, and you can see that it is now 5 again. Back in main var is 5. Then we enter in a new scope. In main, in a new scope, var is, and then it gives the value 5. Now the reason that var exists in this new scope is because this new scope is a part of our main function. If this were in a separate function, var would not even exist, and we probably wouldn't even be able to compile our code. I'll show you that in a moment. So initially, in the new scope, we inherit this var from the main function. Then we create a new var in our new scope, and we set, and it's int var equals 10. We output in main in a new scope, var is 10. Then we exit that scope. We're back in the main part of our main function. At the end of main, the var that we created in our new scope no longer exists. This int var equals 10 only exists in this part of our code. It does not exist anywhere else. Okay, so at the end of main, var is 5. So if you want to see this, I will comment out that integer call, the integer declaration, and I will try to recompile. And now what you can see here is I've got a compiler error. And on my particular system, the way this works out is it gives me the file name where the error occurred, and the line number where it most likely, or where the compiler just got stuck and didn't know what else to do. In Visual Studio, this will look a little bit differently, but you will still see this in the logging window, in the logging panel down at the bottom of the IDE workspace. So the error that we have is var was not declared in this scope. So in the scope of this function, var was not declared. because I commented it out. The var from main function, because it is inside of the main function, does not get passed to the void function. So we'll compile it again, and you can see that now it's there. So that is scoping. That's the idea of separate scopes. Anytime you use curly braces to create a block of code, you've created a scope. That may be a for scope, it may be an if scope, it may be a while scope, but it is a scope, and you have to understand that variables can work separately. This is the biggest reason why you can continue to use in your for loops, you can continue to use I every time you create a new for loop, unless you're nesting for loops. Because that I variable only exists in the scope of that for loop. Now, if you've got nested loops, then you have to pick other variable names, and that's where we start using J or K, depending on how deep we nest. So that's scoping, and in the next video, we will look at a way that you can have variables and constants available everywhere in your code, global variables and global constants. And we'll explain how to do that and when not to do it, because it's not something you want to do all the time. You usually want to stick with local variables, just because anytime something is global, you run the risk of overriding something else within your function. So stay tuned for the next video, and have a good day.